Thank you guys for taking time out of your day to join for our webinar. We're going to be talking today about how to write a CV in preparation for grad school applications. And we're honored to have Dr. Escalante, who's an assistant professor at the Department of Biological Sciences at the University of Illinois. Dr. Ignacio is a tropical biologist who studies the mechanisms of animal behavior. And by integrating tools in biomechanics, communication, and physiology, Dr. Ignacio explores animal behavior through the lenses of ecology and evolution. And he studies arachnoids and insects in the context of changing environmental and evolutionary pressures. And this research takes place in the tropical rainforest of his native Costa Rica, as well as in the urban setting of Chicago and surrounding areas. And so without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dr. Ignacio Escalante, who will take over from here. Oh, are you able to?
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
We managed. Thank you. I was able to unmute myself. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Denisha, thank you so much for organizing and for putting this together. Yeah, Denisha mentioned I'm an assistant professor recently hired here at the University of Illinois in Chicago. I'm originally from Costa Rica, and I did my undergrad degree and my master's degree in biology in Costa Rica. And then I moved to the US to get my PhD at the University of California at Berkeley. And my PhD degree is on environmental sciences, policy, and management. And when I was in the PhD program, as well as currently in my position, I serve in the admissions committee for my department. So every year we review applications of people that are interested in pursuing graduate degrees in biology, broadly in topics like molecular biology, neurosciences, as well as ecology and evolution, which is like roughly my area of expertise. So I have some experience reading and preparing CVs, certainly when I was looking for a PhD position, then postdoctoral training, and then faculty positions and professor positions. I did a lot of career exploration and preparation of a lot of documents, including the CV. And nowadays, as many other professors, I get requests to participate, to apply to graduate program, to join my lab, my research group here at the university. So the CV is always the point of entry for this process. I also want to mention that I've been collaborating with Científico Latino for the past 5 years in the graduate school mentorship program. And this is my first time serving as a panelist in one of the webinars. So this is very exciting to be here. It's fantastic to hear that it's people coming from literally the whole world. um, and yeah, with that, not sure what's the dynamic or how do we want to lead this. Denisha, maybe you have some more structure, or should we open up for questions, or should I give an overview of the CV and expectations? Happy to do any of those.
Yeah, you can start with an overview and then we can open it up for questions after that. Thank you.
Okay. So what I'm gonna say is, in my experience, pertains and is relevant for the process of applying to a PhD program or a master's program in ecology and evolutionary biology fields. That includes biology broadly, but certain fields in biology function relatively different. Molecular biology, cellular biology, or work slightly different. And I know engineers departments, or like, I guess this any STEM science technology, engineering, and mathematics roughly works in the same way. So I'm going to be sharing a lot from my experience as a student, as someone serving in admissions committee, reviewing CVs and application materials, but I'll be happy to take any other questions pertaining potentially other fields and so on. I guess at the very base of all of this, a CV is basically a recollection of your experience, and in any instance in which you are sharing your experience with people with the process of or with the goal of applying for a graduate program, it's good that you're very intentional with what you want this information to show, what you want this to be displaying, and what you want what do you want people to read about you and your experience. So in a way, a CV is you're summarizing in different categories your experience as well as chronologically with the intention of the person who's reading it have an idea of your training. For the purpose of of what we are here for today, I guess a CV is the more formal recollection of your experience. Um, and there are a few sort of like tactics that you can use to make a strategy with that information. Because when we review applications for graduate school, we're interested in seeing a couple things. Is this person well trained at the stage that they are? Does this person has relevant experience to succeed in this field? And given their experience and interest, would this person be a good candidate to succeed in a master's program or a PhD program at this institution? So with that, it's important that it's clear several aspects that are very basic. For example, your how much experience have you had in research versus in education, in community engagement, in science communication, and those are the sort of like categories there. One thing when preparing for this webinar, what I was very what I was thinking is that sometimes across our career paths, we find ourselves doing many different things, which is great. And those things that are not necessarily academic, scientific, or academic or scientific can be very relevant to evaluate your trajectory or your training in these things. So I always encourage people to include mentions to other type of jobs that they have had in any field. You sometimes might feel that you're working in a restaurant or in a store does not necessarily apply or translate to be important for a grad school application in STEM. However, I encourage you to do it because those experiences can be very relevant for a few reasons. When we are interested in reviewing applications of potential candidates, we're interested in finding ways of demonstrated experiences that you can get the job done, that you're reliable, that you have leadership, that you participate in activities, and then that you're able to work in a team and that you are able to communicate with other human beings, whether classmates or supervisors or peers at the same sort of like level. So anything along those lines can be very informative for reviewers to see in your experience that you have been involved in anything that pertains to science or non-science events, and that can give you sort of more comprehensive um, a more comprehensive view of your experience and your qualities as an employee, as a collaborator, as a team member, and so on. In the US, a lot of the programs in a lot of the masters and PhD programs are usually associated with a teaching assistant position. That means that as a PhD or a master's student, and of course this vary between universities, but usually what happens is that you do your research, you take your classes, and you're a teaching assistant for that university. That means that when we hire or when we make offers for students to do a master's or a PhD, we're looking for people that also have the ability or can be trained or already have experience in teaching, in managing groups, in managing resources, in meeting deadlines, and in communicating in different sort of like circumstances. So that is all very helpful in that case. Skills. Yeah, another thing I want to mention here is that well, I do have a lot of experience both in like US audiences and institutions as well as Latin American institutions, particularly in Costa Rica. And I also teach a field class in tropical ecology for Latin American students. So we review applications from all over the continent, actually. And something that is common that I've seen some trends is that people have a lot of experience, and that is fantastic. You have been a researcher assistant for one or two or many other projects in a given lab or a given university and so on. And it's good to demonstrate those sort of experiences in your CV by explicitly saying what kind of skills you gain working on those and what kind of methods, for example, you were trained on. So it's always good to highlight that I worked from this year to this year in this laboratory, and in the process, I learned specific skills. Could be anything, right? qPCR, um, chemical ecology tools, field service, coding, visualizing, etc. So it's always good to highlight those very succinctly, very briefly. What are the experiences that you have and the training that you have? Yeah. So going back to relevant experiences, you can include anything that you feel that is relevant for getting a PhD. And I was mentioning things like, your job in a store, in a restaurant, in a supermarket, anywhere that you have experience. Could be important to include it here because while working on those, you communicate with people, project management, financial tools, how to manage a budget, how to manage or request funding, and so on. So all those type of experiences are useful. Yeah, I can say more things, but I guess I'm interested hearing if people have specific questions or if Danisha, you have specific guiding prompts that you want me to expand on.
Okay, so one thing I always struggle with when writing a CV is how much of your research experience do you put into your CV? How much of your project do you talk about, and how many details do you have to give?
That is a very good question. And I think I want to mention a few things. There's always the difference between leadership and participation, or they can have different terms, but if it's like a research project that you designed yourself, that is super important to include at the very top of the CV, because that means that you have come up with ideas, potentially with the experimental design, collected the data, presented, and so on. So all those level of details, if it's something that you designed, that you led on your own, is very important. For US undergrad institutions, that usually or sometimes comes associated with presenting at a internal symposium, with getting some particular funding, getting some kind of like recognition for your institution. So all those kind of achievements are always very good to include. In terms of other type of details, it's good to be very concise, very succinct, and being very brief. So I have experience. I participated for 3 semesters in, like you can say something like this. I participated during 3 semesters doing research in a molecular biology laboratory. I learned these techniques to explore these topics. And in this case, I would say you might not need to give too much information on what's the specific topic for many reasons, but like just broadly what it is. I work on projects related to the morphology and function of enzymes, and then that's pretty much it. Particularly if it's a project that you did not design. Yeah, so you want to give the idea that you have some relevant training, and then by getting the natural next step is that you keep getting training on these activities. And of course, at this stage, it's not expected that you have a lot of knowledge on on or experience on many topics, because that's precisely what you want. Then pursue a graduate degree in getting more experience in research and education.
Okay. Um, there's a question from the audience. Do you recommend to include such research experiences in the initial section, even if they don't classify there based on chronological order?
Certainly, CVs they have your personal touch, and there are many different ways of doing it, either at the beginning or somewhere where it's clear that you highlight this. So always having sections is very helpful. Even if they don't classify there based on the chronological order. Sometimes chronological order is not necessarily as important as the relevance for this purpose. And I say this, sometimes people, you change your major, you started university for one thing and then you did something else. So if I'm reviewing applications for someone in ecology and evolution, and students have a lot of training in engineer or molecular biology, that will make those experiences a little bit less relevant. So it's always good to highlight the things that are most relevant. And here, I also want to mention an advice I give people at this stage all the time. Put yourself in the shoes or in the position of the other person. Like all the people are reviewing multiple CVs, multiple applications. So you want to make a quick impact, and you want people to be able to see how well trained you are and how amazing you are fast. You want the message to come across fast. Like in the newspaper. Think about the newspaper. When you read the newspaper, they give you the headlines right away. So you can do the same in the CV. You can say, this is me, I'm amazing because of all these reasons. And then make sure you can highlight first what's more relevant for that particular program.
Okay, thank you. Do you think there's a good limit for the number of pages a CV should be, or how long it should be?
No, there's no real limit. I mean, the main difference between a CV and a resume is precisely that, the length. The resumes tend to be short, 2 pages maximum or three. A CV is a recollection of experiences. So I guess tying it back with what I was saying earlier, in the first 2 pages, you should include everything that you consider is most relevant for this position. And the rest is just a collection of other sort of like less related, tangential opportunities. But yeah, if you have a long CV, just remember that people are probably going to pay more attention to the first 2 pages. So you want the relevant information to be there at the top.
Right. Speaking of relevant information, for the educational background, should we mention the courses we undertook? My answer is no, but I'd love to know your opinion on that.
One thing I have seen is like the relevant coursework that you have taken. So, for example, I mean, my research lab studies animal behavior and biomechanics. Biomechanics is the studying how animals move using physical tools, physics tools, sorry, and engineered tools to understand animal movement. So one section could include precisely that relevant, people say relevant skills. You can have a section of relevant experiences, relevant coursework is very useful. And you can include 2 or 3 or I don't know, 4, no more than 5 classes that are very relevant. Like if I'm recruiting a student and they took an ecology class, an animal behavior class, and a biomechanics class, that would give them a little boost in their probability of being accepted. But I'm not interested in seeing that they took physics or geology or humanities and arts. Those will be in another package that is the transcripts of like the description of the classes you took.
Okay, that's interesting. So do you recommend creating a hard skills or soft skills section in the CV?
Yes. Well, I don't want to make this sound as like this is the recipe for success, which clearly should not be read like that. But um, one strategy to highlight what your training is could be using those sections. And you have experience in team management, and then you can list those there. Communication, you can list those there. Certain like research, relevant research experience, and then for certain fields, like I'm thinking of like neuroscience, is very relevant that you have experience with tissue preparation, with surgery, with uh, what is it, patch clamp, and those like techniques in neuroscience. And so if you know that potentially could be very helpful. So I think this could be tied with the question that you should be exploring on your own. What makes a student a good candidate for a particular graduate program? And once you have that answer, you can say, okay, this is based on the desired qualifications for this program. This is what I have. Let's make sure that those match in my application.
Okay, yeah, that's really interesting. Um, Another thing that I find people tend to get tripped about, do I need to have a research output from all research experience I have? For example, publications, conferences, posters, things like that. Or is it okay to also include like research intensive courses that you might have taken in undergrad? Does that still count even if there's no like
Mhm.
output?
Yeah. And you can be very intentional on how do you frame that? How do you talk about these things? Because yeah, sometimes you can go to to a conference just to listen to talks. Uh, and it's not as a formative experience that taking a research intensive class. So you can highlight those as you see fit. So having particular outcomes is good, although it's not necessarily the end goal, or it's not necessarily the contribution to your training is not necessarily that intense.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Um, so another question here that I'm reading, I'm sorry, I'm trying to go in order of all the questions. How could I put that I started a master's but didn't complete it in a CV? Do
Um,
yeah.
okay, easy. Just put it there. Don't need to expand, don't need to justify. I want to make a little parenthesis in your grad school application. Your story is yours, and you're the one telling your story. So you don't need to like disclose this information or get into details of why you have a gap year or why, I guess further why you study in an institution and then you finish in another one. Like life happens, and those reasons tend to be very personal, very uniquely yours. So no need to disclose this information. Um, in situations like this, you started a master's but didn't complete it. So it could be in a section of like education, and then from this semester to this semester, you can say enrolled in a master's program at this university. Um, yeah, and you can differentiate it that um, from if you end up actually finishing a master somewhere else, and then you can say completed. In my case, I have like the title of my master's thesis in my PhD dissertation there, but it's common for it is actually more common than you think of people have been in these situations. So I would encourage you to include it and no further need to explain why didn't you finish it. Because ultimately you were there, you were enrolled, you were admitted to a master's, and then you potentially took classes, so did a lot of work there.
Okay, thank you. So another question, what if I have a research experience different than the domain or school program I am applying to? For example, having a research experience in neuroscience, but applying for grad school in biology.
Mhm. Okay, that's a good one. That is a very good one. And it could be like the switch can be even like bigger, going from um, medical school. I guess in Latin America is common. Latin America, um, med school and dental school is not a graduate degree. You start as an undergrad, as a freshman in med school. So a lot of people switch there. So training skills are flexible in that regard. I don't see a problem with that. So you're applying, let's say, for an organismal biology program. Um, yeah, so you can think about what of your training in neuroscience or in another field is more relevant and highlight that. Um, and then include it in your CV as relevant training. Some things are going to be more relevant. Let me think. Neuroscience, you're going to have a lot of training in behavior, in physiology, in cognition, in communication. So those things are very relevant to organismal biology. So you can highlight the things that neuroscience have in common with organismal biology. Um, as opposed to more methodological training like patch clamp or electro blanking on that word, like using electrodes to measure brain activity or neural activity and markers and so on. So think about like what they have in common. And even if you switch from, let's say, engineer to evolutionary biology, think about the things that those fields have in common. And every field these days have a lot of coding, data management, data science. So those things are transferable.
That's really amazing advice. As a graduate student in neuroscience,
Yeah.
I'm always amazed at the breadth of neuroscience and how easy we can go from cell culture to computation. So thank you for that.
Mhm.
Um, Another interesting question. Okay, when listing research experience, can we also state the status of the paper, regardless if it's been published or still in preparation? For example, if you have a project listed, can you also put manuscript in preparation or manuscript under review? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's good that you're thinking of this, and it's good to be very clear and very specific with the status of every project. I actually encourage people to include things like this. You participated in a project and you collected data, so it's in prep. Um, and at this point, is a fine line between like it's in progress versus like how much it is actually in progress and how likely it is to become like a conference presentation or a paper or a preprint and so on. So you can include it as you can include, and the more specific you are, the better. You can include the authors, the tentative title, and you can say in preparation, submission intended for March of 2025. And in this cycle of grad school application, I think it would be good to say that, if you have a big project that you're working on, that you have had conversations with your professor, with your principal investigator, and those projects are likely going to become a paper in the near-ish future, you can include them and be very specific in saying, we intend to submit this for publication or as a preprint or in GitHub or Dryad in any sort of like other form there by this time, and be specific like December 2024 or July 2025, things like that. So that is also good. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Okay. Is there a specific format faculty likes to see? In this day and age, I know we are always trying to get more modern and find new ways to um, not only present posters, but also present CVs and application material. So is there a specific, format that faculty prefers, or is there something that sticks out in your mind that you've maybe seen and would caution against doing in a CV?
No, not particularly. Like, I don't have a lot of aesthetic preferences or requirements personally. Um, so so nothing specific there. Um, if it's easy to read and it stands out and it helps you, and if it helps your case, then you can do whatever you want. And then you can use colors or different structures. And if you have a training in graphical design or arts, those are super welcome. Just don't take it too too far into any extreme of presentation. But at least in my field, ecology and evolution, we don't pay attention to those things. And in fact, it can help you stand out a little bit. Certain, like, if it's visually pleasing, it works. And what you can do is like ask yourself, oh, if I was reading this, would I be like trying to close the file, or would I want to like read more about this? Or you can try with somebody else, with another professor or someone in your field or family member or whatever. Like, do you visually like this? And that could help you do that.
Okay. Another question asks about including research experiences of research assistant in under work experience or a research experience section.
I would say for the purpose of applying for a grad school program, I would put it in research experience. And in fact, you can highlight that you get paid for those um, as an added bonus of this, um, because ultimately it's more relevant that you did research and that you were paid for that rather than the other way around, if that makes sense.
Okay. Does volunteer work related to vaccines also count? Can they help during the application process?
Yes. Yes, anything related counts. Um, whether it's paid or not, or volunteer. So if by doing that volunteer work, you gain some skills in a particular field that you're applying for, that completely counts. And in fact, in many fields, that is the expectation. For med school, for vet school, dental school, and law, um, the people that want to be lawyers, they they expect a lot of volunteer work, or they call it shadowing doctors or shadowing clinics or lawyers and so on. Um, so this is very good. So don't think just because you were volunteer, it doesn't count, or if you weren't paid, it doesn't count. Everything counts. Just ask yourself, like, what in all these amazing things that I've done, what has prepared me, and what experiences are more relevant than others?
Okay, so while we were mentioning the volunteering experience, um, they're asking if you should explain what you did. So yes, but I guess more so, relate that to maybe your passion about research if you're like using it to apply for grad school.
Yeah, it's always good to include a little description, like a few word, I don't know, 10 words describing what the experience was about, particularly something like that the audience will be less familiar with. So it's always good to contribute, to explain a little bit of what your contribution was, and how is that relevant? Because yeah, the people reading it, sometimes you read a name. I did research in John Hopkins University. I'm like, I don't even know what that university is. Well, I do now, but you can include a sentence saying, I did volunteer research in this institution, in which I um, supervise the data collection from tissue samples. I don't know, something along those lines.
Okay, thank you. Um, so this goes back to our original discussion on what components to include. So like coursework and things like that in a CV. And so this question is asking if you did any other relevant trainings, do you include the comprehensive description as a separate section in the CV? Or would you just talk about it in the context of whatever research project it pertained to?
It varies. I don't think there's a recipe for success here. It could be relevant training, it could be research experience. Um, yeah, it's flexible. It's flexible. Again, I would say just make sure that that opportunity is highlighted properly throughout the CV. That the person reading this knows that you had that experience.
Okay. Um, I think you already touched on this when you were talking about your department not really having too many specifics on the format of the CV, but I guess to reassure this person's question, um, they're wondering about the approach to reading a CV. Do universities take a more holistic assessment um, when they're, judging a CV? So I guess if I'm interpreting this person's question right, maybe they're wondering if things like their GPA or
Mhm,
research experience or publications or awards would be weighted heavier one or the other.
mhm. That could be tremendously different between institutions and between programs. From my experience, I can say um, we use the CV and the essays, the research statement, the personal statement, and some universities use diversity contribution statements to assess how prepared a person is and their relevant training and so on. So it is flexible. I do have, yeah. In other countries, including Brazil, I have many colleagues, and I know this varies quite a bit. And Brazil has a very robust nationwide system for their CV. Is it Lattes or something like that? I think it's Lattes. But it's like it's very good because it's very universal across fields. So people get assessed. It's easier, I think, to assess people with different trainings and backgrounds and so on. Um, but yeah, just I guess at this point, what I would say is that CV is one of the many tools that you have to demonstrate the relevant experience, and people are going to be interested in seeing if what kind of training do you have? You might have a lot, might not have a lot, and that's no problem. And I guess they judge that. Again, one thing I always encourage people to do is like read very closely the description of the graduate program. Let's say you want to apply to do neuroscience at I don't know, Stanford University, go to their website and then read the profile. They have mentions of like the profile of our graduates. And they would say something like, we train the next generation of scientists that use novel techniques to advance our knowledge of neurons and neural processes across the animal kingdom, something like that. And we usually train people with a background in this and that. So pay very close attention to the language that a particular program uses, and that will help you judge if that is a good program for you, if you will be interested in that program, and what kind of like values or what's the mission of a given institution or a given program, so you can tailor that in your application. For example, I did my PhD in an environmental sciences policy and management department. So a lot of what we do in that department was interdisciplinary research between natural and social sciences. So when we were reviewing applications, we were very interested in seeing how much of people training, how much interdisciplinary training they have, and what, the level of abilities or the capacity for these candidates to be successful in a field where different people have different backgrounds. Long answer, but might be helpful.
Okay, that's actually, you brought up a really good point, that I think transitions well with this other question. That's kind of talking about like, do you adjust your CV based on which school you're applying to, or like between different programs? And based on what you said, I think the answer is yes, slightly. Yeah.
It's good to, yeah. It's good to ask yourself, should I readjust it? Is this program in Florida very different than this program in New York that I'm applying to? If the answer is yes, then take a look at that. Because sometimes, we receive application, it's very clear that, this person is trying to apply everywhere, and that could be good, or that might not be as good, or like if your CV um, highlights more of your training in one field versus the other that we're more interested in. So if fields are different, if the programs are different, then take some time to readjust that.
Okay. So this goes back to earlier when we were talking about how to articulate research experiences. So they're wondering if you should use short bullet points to describe the experience, or I guess maybe a paragraph form to like explain what you learned or worked on. In general, what's your advice for, how to be direct and concise about, the research experience?
I think my advice is precisely what you just said, Denisha. Just be precise and concise, and the format that you use could be different. Like some people can say a lot in a few words with a bullet point, or sometimes a little paragraph is good enough. You One thing I've done in the past in my CV is put in like a little paragraph, and I'm highlighting specific words, right? I put it in bold or underline. I was the leader of this initiative, or I developed this, or I participated, or this impacted 200 students from Costa Rica, or things like that. So you can be very targeted, but the lesson should be, I think the goal should be to be concise and very precise. And yeah, think about like that, you want to be succinct. You want to have a couple pages that really drive home your experience.
Thank you. So there's a question that asks about adding a section on the first page that includes a short description of your overall research interest. Do you think that would go in a CV, or if that would be a good addition?
Yeah, I've seen that. I don't have really strong opinions about this. It's your own, it's your story, and you tell how you want. It's your personal touch. Some people I've seen like people having like a goal, and then my goal is to apply for grad school in a program in ecology and evolution with the intent of becoming an academic and helping the development of scientific capacity in my country. Things like that are useful. Your goal, your relevant training, your research interest. If you put research interest, just be careful that it's not like super long, because in grad school you already, or you might already have like a research statement document that you will use. Um, yeah.
Okay. We're coming down to the end. If anyone has any more questions, again, feel free to either unmute yourself or you can put it in the chat. But for this last question I see here, while mentioning technical skills, should we mention the skills that we have hands-on expertise with, or should we also mention the techniques that we have knowledge about, the ones that we learned during practical classes?
That is a very good question. And I have some experience as a professor, or I have heard of experiences with colleagues and other professors that, sometimes applicants highlight that they have training in a given technique, and well, but what they had is experience, so it's quite different. Like knowing a technique might not be the same as like actually being proficient in a technique, or with coding and data science things. It's important to be very careful and very honest of, for example, saying I took a class in programming, so I am familiar with Python and C++, um, but that doesn't mean that you're proficient in those. So the more detail, the better. You could say like, um, relevant skills, um, proficient in R and MATLAB, and then in another sentence, familiar with Python and C++. So like, it's different. It's like knowing different languages, right? Like it's different. There's a difference between like listening and speaking and writing. So it's important to be very like explicit and honest about that. And you can use that in your favor, saying like, well, I know these few techniques, I'm really good at these techniques, but I also know all these other techniques that I'm not really good because I haven't had experience with those. So you can use that kind of language of like proficient, familiar, and a few others. The same with like, you have leadership experience versus participation in some projects or processes.
Okay. This question is very specific.
Mhm.
And they're asking about, they have a publication in a field that's different from their intended area that they want to apply to. And they're wondering if they should still highlight their publication at the top of their CV or place it at the bottom. And my opinion on that would be you would still talk about the publication in the context of like your own research experience. Like how I typically do my CV is like research experience and then like, paper. And then at the end, I have my publication section and then like the whole publication is there. But I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I agree. I agree precisely with what you said. Paper is a paper, and in science, nothing says I'm a scientist more explicitly than being a co-author on a paper. So it's there, even though it's not relevant. And I guess it is, even though the topic is not the same, the field is not the same, the fact that you contributed to a paper, that you were an author, potentially collected data, participated in the theoretical background, and the writing of it, that is very important. And I want to link that to what I said earlier, that in this process, we as faculty, as admissions committee, are interested in seeing what are the projects that people have taken all the way to the end, to the finish line. So papers in different fields are relevant because it means that you were there during the whole process and it's a project that you delivered. Sometimes non-academic experiences could give the same process. For US based students, sometimes they're like, you were the president of the archery club in your college and you're applying to med school and you don't really know if that's relevant. I would say it's very relevant because it means that, you know how to communicate with people, you know how to like plan for events, you know how to like engage with people, with professors and with administrators and with donors. And sometimes they manage money. So your order, your leader, and those sort of things. So, um, think about the amazing of all the amazing things you've done, what's relevant and how you can highlight that. And many skills are very transferable.
Right. For the publications section, for when listing publications, um, this person's wondering if they should list all the authors or just first author and then their name in bold. Um, when they're not the first author or their name at all when they are the first author, they're just wondering about how to list the publication, if they should just list the whole thing or not.
It's flexible. I don't have strong feelings about that. I personally always highlight my name with bold, wherever it is in the list of authors. Some people do it differently. You're saying first author, my name in bold, et al. Yeah, I mean in the interest of making it succinct, this is common. I would say first, second. Let's say you're a fourth author, you can put first, second, third, your name in bold, and then et al. Later on.
Right. Okay. And then this other question about if you don't have any research publications, but you have experience in popular science writing, should we mention that in the CV under writing skills?
Yes, it could be on the writing skills, it could be under outreach publication, or it could be popular science publications, like if this is something that was actually published by an editorial company or it was published online, um, it was published on social media, however form, it's like a demonstrated thing that you have written. So you can use writing skills or you can use whatever type of skill this is. And like, we are used to seeing, for example, categories as peer review publications, outreach publications. A lot of people do in non-governmental organization, they do like reports and there's another word, but something like that, technical writing for government, sometimes for government um, processes. It's not a peer review, but you work on very hard on a document that gets distributed there. So anything, just remember that anything that you do could be relevant, and it's your task to figure out what's relevant and how to tell the people writing um, of all those amazing experiences you've done.
Okay, thank you okay. One more question. And this will be our final question. So under the paper section, do I only put papers that I have published or I have written?
What's the difference between published and written? Oh, okay. Written are not necessarily published. Well, going back to what we are talking earlier, you can be explicit in saying, well, if it's published, you have the information there of like in which journal and and the link to that. And if it's not published, you can put it in preparation, in review, or in any stage. Intended submission by December of 2024, things like that. So you can put things like that there.
Okay. Again, I think we talked about this earlier, but do you recommend including a short personal statement or summary statement at the beginning of the CV, or do you think you can just leave that for, your actual research statement or personal statement?
It's variable. It could help. It could help. And I think a lesson that I have learned is that in the US, for US universities, CVs are very flexible. There's not an intended specific format. Um, so it's your own voice there. In other countries it's different. And yeah, someone asked about including a picture, that usually you don't see that in US CVs or for US institutions. I know in some other countries it is common. So it is flexible. I think the format, for the purpose of applying for a program in the US, the format, it is flexible, tend to be flexible. At least that has been my experience. And I think what's important is that you create a document that is easy to read, easy to navigate, and people can quickly see the relevant experiences that you have had.
Okay. Well, with that, do you have any last words of advice that you'd like to impart?
I always tell people it'll be fine. I know it's a stressful process, and it is, and it's a lot of work, but it's gonna be fine. And Científico Latino has tremendously great resources to help you navigate this process. So take a deep breath, take it easy. It's going to be fine. And yeah, just and going back to my point earlier, put yourself in the situation of the person reading this. Always write and prepare documents with the intention of making their life easier rather than more difficult. So when writing essays and CVs, just help them um, navigate your documents.
Okay. Well, with that, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah.
This was a great webinar. If you guys are looking for more examples on CVs, please look at the Científico Latino website under the resume/CV writing tab. There's tons of examples there. And thank you so much, Dr. Escalante, for joining us. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you. These were fantastic questions, really great questions, and good luck to everybody. And thank you so much, Denisha, for organizing this event. It's great.
Okay. Thank you.